What's up everyone and welcome to RC Retro. In this episode I'm going to be building the legendary, the iconic Tamiya Sand Scorcher. So we're going to crack this open and get building, and then we're going to get this magnificently painted Sand Scorcher body on it. Now I did a previous episode where I unboxed this and shared it with you. This was painted by a gentleman by the name of Simon. I'll put his Tamiya Club name at the bottom so you could check out all of his work. But this body is unreal. The attention to detail on here is absolutely amazing. And so, like I said, there was a whole episode just dedicated to me unboxing and sharing this with all of you. And I'll put the link to that video in the description down below and you can check that out. But we're going to put this back in the box for right now. And like I said, get this open and get building. The Tamiya Sand Scorcher came out in December of 1979 and was kit number 58016. It was produced until 1984 and was based on the SRB chassis. Some other RCs that were also based on the SRB chassis were the Rough Rider and the Ford F-150 Ranger. Now the Sand Scorcher is probably one of the most iconic Tamiya kits ever produced, and so 30 years later in 2010, Tamiya re-released this legendary RC. Now it's all about presentation, my friends, and as you can see, everything is laid out beautifully here with blister packaging just like the original. Now of course there's differences between the original and the re-release, but in the interest of time, that's something that we could possibly discuss in a future video. But for now, let's just get right into this build. So for step number one, we're starting off with the gearbox. Now the Sand Scorcher doesn't have a differential. This is just straight up gears, and the gearbox is all metal. Actually, there's a lot of metal for this kit, so there's a lot of reminders for you to use thread lock in many of the steps throughout this build. Also in this step, you're putting on your universal joints, which are held in place by these big grub screws. Actually, there's going to be a lot of parts held in place with grub screws, so you definitely need to have thread lock. And you know what else is pretty cool? You probably noticed this when I was putting the gearbox together. They give you ball bearings. Yep. Completely ball raced this entire kit, and it's all hex hardware as well. In step two, I put on the rear arms and the torsion bars, which at first I was second guessing myself with the direction of these, as it looks like they're pointing downwards in the manual, but I just wasn't sure. But then I looked at step three on the next page, and yes, they are pointing down. Also, when putting on the arms, there's a grub screw that goes on each side of the arm to hold them in place, so 2 grub screws for each arm. And there's a hole on the top and on the bottom, and the manual clearly states to put the grub screw in from the bottom, and like a dope I put them in from the top, so off camera I had to fix that. For step 3, I have to install the silver can motor. What's interesting about this is that when you slide it into the all metal gearbox, there are actually 2 pegs that go into the screw holes of the motor, and that's just what holds it in place rather than actually 2 screws. Then you're going to have to place the clear plastic motor cap over the other end, feed the motor wires through that, and using 3 screws, screw them in, and that's what's going to keep your motor secure and in place. Now for step 5, I had to put on the spur and the pinion gear. They give you a choice of 2 spur gears and 2 pinion gears, one for a high ratio and the other for a low ratio setting. I went with a low ratio, which is the 15-tooth pinion and the 70-tooth spur, but in all honesty, it really doesn't matter for me because as far as this build, this is going to be a shelf queen, and I don't think I'm going to be running this one. So I built step 5 off camera because I went with an aftermarket aluminum rear guard rather than going with the plastic one that comes with the kit. I just felt like this one looks cooler, and I got a matching one for the front bumper as well, which we'll take a look at later on in the video. But yeah, definitely all aluminum is the way to go. Now in a majority of my build videos, I typically build the shocks off camera. But for the greater good of this video, I'll at least show building the piston rods. What I found interesting with this build is that the shorter of the shock shafts is used in the rear, and obviously the smaller shock bodies as well. Typically your smaller shocks are in the front, but this isn't your typical buggy, I guess. Also, you'll notice that I'm coating my shock spacers and O-rings with clear slime. I use TDK, it seems to work great, and I very rarely have had any leaky shocks. Next, I'm attaching the aluminum rear roll bar to the all-metal gear case. Now I decided to switch back to the red gel-like thread lock from Tamiya for no apparent reason, just because. And also, I'm attaching the rear shocks in this step. Okay, so far so good. Remember, this is my first SRB chassis I've put together, so as of now, everything is going together smoothly and I'm really enjoying the build. For step 9, I'm attaching the metal gear case to the chassis along with the metal reinforcing plate. Now the manual tells you that the middle screw is just temporary, but when I put it through the well nut, it wasn't catching the thread. But afterwards, off camera, I figured it out. I just had to push it a little harder and it caught the thread. Next, it's onto the front axles. I'm attaching the front axles to the upper and lower arms. Now even though these arms are metal, they do have the letters molded into them so that you can figure out what sides they go on. For example, on one arm it says LU, and that stands for left upper arm. So that clears up any confusion as to what side to put them on. Now I'm taking these ball studs and pushing them into these plastic ball plates to make 4. These are what go into your upper and lower arms on each side and hold the uprights into place. Finally, you're going to attach your front shocks and push your front springs into place, which is what creates the tension in your front suspension. Ooh, that rhymes. Tension and suspension. In step 12, I'm attaching these 3 metal tubes between the front axle and the uprights. This is what holds everything together. There are 2 3x6mm screws that you have to thread into the middle tube, and I actually realized that I used the wrong size screws there. I had to take those out and replace them with the correct screws. Now this is really a first for me. In step 13, I'm building the servo saver, and I've never seen anything like this. It's 4 plastic pieces that are held together with a ring, and everything sits around the base of a metal post. Very interesting. Next, we are mounting the whole front end to the chassis using 4 screws. Only the last screw gave me somewhat of an issue, but it eventually went in after I cleaned up the hole in the chassis a little bit with a hobby knife, which allowed the screw to then pass through and catch the thread in the metal. And then lastly, just got to snap on the steering arms. And that's the front end. Here's an up close of the servo saver so you can see that for yourself, along with the steering. So in step 15, you're supposed to be mounting your front bumper, which I did not use because aesthetically, I don't like the way it looks. Actually, it's kind of silly looking. Plus, I'm trying to go for as close to box art as possible. So in the front, I have the matching aluminum bumper to the one that I used in the rear. This goes together rather easily. Once you get it together, it's just 2 screws right up here, and then you have these 2 mounting brackets that bolt right onto the chassis, giving it a nice, simple, clean, finished look. Much better in my opinion. Next, I built the steering rod and secured my servo in place with double-sided stick tape into the base of the clear plastic mechanism box. Then you have these 4 cam lock screws which are threaded with springs. Those go through the top of the mechanism box. Once the top is on, you take a hex driver and push down on the cam locks and twist, and that holds the top on. Also, I put the rubber switch cover on even though I don't have a switch for the ESC installed. Now I'm attaching the receiver case to the mechanism box, which is held in place with 4 tiny screws. And then I'm mounting the entire mechanism box to the chassis, which is held in place with 2 hex screws, and then finally snapping your steering ball cup to the servo saver. And now we're on to building the tires, which the front and rear are 3 pieces that are held together with 4 screws and nuts. I heard these are so much fun to build. But I guess I won't be experiencing that because I'm waiting for an all one-piece chrome wheel to come from the RC channel. And that hopefully will arrive sooner than later. I just ordered them about 4 days ago and I think they're coming from overseas. So that's as far as we go for right now, but in video time, we're just going to keep moving along. You don't build tires, you mount them. So I apologize because in the previous clip I said I was building tires. I meant to say wheels, but I'm sure you knew what I meant. Anyways, these wheels are gorgeous, super shiny, well made, and the fronts come with ball bearings. Again, these came from the RC channel. Stunning, just stunning. I can't stress enough how awesome these aluminum wheels are. Got those paddle tires on, so we're just gonna finish up in the rear. Now we're going to move to the fronts, screw those on, to the other side, and then a little test of the suspension, and everything looks good. Now we have the exhaust. This comes in 3 pieces that you glue together, and the manual says to paint it in black. But I opted to paint it in silver. I mean, if you went with the original black plastic rear bumper, that would be fine, but it didn't make sense for me since I went with the aluminum rear bumper. Plus I wanted to keep it box art, and as you can see, the exhaust is not black. So now let's get this attached to the rear. So the last step in this build before you go onto the body is mounting the exhaust. And not for nothing, this was a little bit of a pain in the butt. Getting it on there with these 3 black clamps you see here, and these tiny screws which weren't threading into the plastic, oh. So I had to take the exhaust out and pre-thread the holes, take the screws out. Then I was able to secure it in place with the clamps. What a pain. And there it is, the chassis in all its glory. So for the big finish, let's get that amazing body that I showed you all at the beginning of the video on here for some glamour shots. And let's cue the music. So, how do you think this turned out? I want to hear your thoughts. Please drop a comment down below and let me know. I don't have to tell you how I feel that this turned out, but what I will say is this is probably a gem in my collection. Not the top gem, but one of the gems of my collection. So what's next for the Sand Scorcher? Well, I have a 13.5 brushless setup right over here and a 3S LiPo. I was thinking about throwing that in there and giving it a blast. Yeah, right. No way. Not a chance. But what I am actually thinking about, and I'm not going to do this right away, is eventually I would like to do a video comparing the original Sand Scorcher to the re-release, more so about the differences between the body. Maybe an RC YouTube channel already did a video on that, or maybe someone will take my idea and run with it before I get a chance to do it. But either way, that's what I would like to do next for the Sand Scorcher. Well, that's really it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you guys all on my next. Take care. Let's go, let's go.